This video is going to ruffle some feathers, I know, but I'm pretty passionate about this, and I think you should try to see past the identity politics of what I'm about to say. Every time there's an election, every few years, the same message is going to hit us. To get out and vote, that your voice matters, we live in a free democracy, the individual has the power to change things, and on the surface that sounds great. It sounds super empowering, and it just sounds like such a utopia. But if you've ever really thought about it, you've probably asked yourself the same question I often do, which is that really true? Do we actually live in a democracy? Does my vote actually matter? Because when you zoom out, the numbers are pretty staggering. Just in the 2020 election, not even half of the American public voted. And I know that a good portion of people in America are people that can't vote because they're either kids or they've lost the privilege to vote, whatever. But even with that low turnout, even with the democratic system not functioning as it's supposed to, the margin in these deciding states of the big swing states like Florida and whatnot is still always going to be tens of thousands of votes. Mathematically, the odds that your one ballot was the deciding factor is almost always zero. And that doesn't mean that voting never swings anything. There are some very niche examples, like there was a vote in 2017 in the Virginia House of Delegates where it literally did end in tie, and they had to draw a name out of a bowl, which is pretty nuts. But come on, bro. The exception is not the rule. These are just, trivia facts. The average, normal, large-scale election, like presidential elections and senator races and whatnot, it doesn't fucking do anything. At least on the individual level. It's like you're just shouting into the void. You're throwing out your ticket, and nobody's gonna see that you did or cared. And the system, I believe, is designed that way on purpose, because there was a time, I believe, where voting did matter. And there was this idea that if you got out there and you voted, that the individual could make an impact. But nowadays, it feels like corruption and lobbying and campaign spending can just drown your vote out. And even with that aside, I'll get into that in a second, even if your candidate wins, that doesn't mean that they're going to stay in power. You can theoretically win an election for your candidate for 4 years, but the moment that candidate gets out, they're just going to undo the whatever the previous person did. One cycle, it might be one side of the party, and the next cycle, the next person comes in and just changes everything. And so no progress ever happens. Nothing actually gets done. But again, I want to get into this point about corruption, because you could be filling out a little bubble on a ballot saying, oh, I vote for this person, right? Meanwhile, billionaires are pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into making sure that their candidate wins. I mean, this is a pretty famous example, I'm sure you guys know, but just in this past election, Elon Musk spent like $270 million to get Trump in office, and there's no way that didn't help. Or I know Bill Ackman, a super famous, I think he might be a banker, he's some sort of finance dude, he's admitted, I will bankroll anyone's campaign if you go against the guy that's running for mayor in New York City. I forget his name, like Zohran Mandani or something like that. He's openly saying, hey, I will spend as much money as possible so that this guy does not get in power. Do you really think that has no impact on your individual vote? And it all feels so slimy where it's like, oh, please, $20 to my campaign. We'll get this person in office, just $5 here and there. Or it just feels so fucking performative. We're told this narrative that our vote matters, and then if you just get out there and you stay and stand your ground, that we can make a change. But that is so naive to ignore all of the corruption that is going on that actually gets people into office. You're just one person. There are corporations and super PACs and the ultra wealthy that are going to flood the system with cash every single cycle with the goal of drowning out your vote. So when people say, oh, every vote counts, I can't help but think, no, really, dog, the dollar is what counts. Your vote is just an illusion. It's a tool that was given to people so that they felt like they had some sort of choice and agency. But really what speaks is dollars. Campaign ads, lobbying, media manipulation, smear campaigns, it all comes down to who has the deepest pockets. And in America, speech might be free, and it's definitely more free than other countries like the UK, but elections are for sale. People buy their ways into office pretty much. And voting feels less like choosing your leaders and more like just this symbolic gesture while the actual campaigning and lobbying is going on behind the doors of billionaires. And again, it's not just America. I just happen to live in America, so this is my perspective, but I am sure other people in other Western countries feel the same way. Like, just look at Russia, for example. The fact that they even have elections is so ridiculous. It's such a joke. Like, oh yeah, we can have an election, it'll be fair. Meanwhile, Putin has been in office for 20 fucking years. And in so many corrupt countries, more corrupt than America, opposition leaders are jailed, or even worse. And I don't know if that's not going to happen in America, the way that things are going. And people are showing up to the polls and like, oh yeah, I'll get my ballot cast. But come on, bro. You cannot be so naive to think that that is the only factor at play. Election results can so often be defrauded. I've literally heard of votes and ballots being casted into the river, like, oh, we just happened to forget about these votes. They somehow ended up in the sewer. Whoopsie daisy. The voting system gives people this illusion of control. But when you actually look behind the curtain, it is the same old people, election after election, pulling the strings. But the illusion is very powerful because, like I said, I know people are going to get mad at me for saying this and they think that I'm just anti-democracy or something. I just don't want to ever be convincing myself and being so naive to think that voting is the one thing that is actually going to make a change. All voting is, in my opinion, is a mechanism to prevent people from revolting. The whole point of America existing and the catalyst for changing everything in a lot of ways was the Boston Tea Party, and how people were like, well, fuck this. We're not going to keep getting taxed and stuff if we can't vote on it. And so we're going to rebel and we're going to have a new country where we do things differently. That was the whole point. Voting is just this false sense of security that you are being heard, that your voice matters, that you as an individual can make a change, even if nothing happens. And that's why governments, and especially corrupt ones, I think, love to run elections, because they want to give the people the idea that they matter and that their voice matters. They keep this facade alive so that people are not going to storm the gates and cause a big stink about it. It's a way of pacifying everyone, a way to channel everyone's frustration into just a little piece of paper instead of the more damaging protests and riots that often ensue. But while we're on the topic of protests, let's talk about that too, because I know a lot of people will say, okay, yeah, voting might be a little bit pointless and symbolic, so why not protest instead? And yeah, on paper, that sounds more direct. You're physically getting out there and showing a mass of people that we matter, our voices matter, we're going to take to the streets and make some noise and demand change. But let's just think about the logical news cycle of almost every single protest ever. People get really mad about something, they stomp and holler, and they bang their trash cans together for like a couple weeks, maybe a couple months. And then pretty soon after that, people forget about it. I think about this a lot with Blackout Tuesday. Do you guys remember that back in like 2020, 2021? I was still in college, and I remember pulling up my phone one day, and every single liberal white girl that I was following had a little black square posted on her feed like, yes, I'm championing for change. And I remember all of my friends and everyone was like, are you guys fucking serious? Do you really think this is what is going to change police brutality in America? If these people actually cared about making an impact, they would not just do one tiny little gesture and then move on. And what do you know? You don't hear any iota of protests from these people years on. I remember Billie Eilish, she said one thing once where she was talking about Breonna Taylor. She was that black woman that got killed in a false police raid, I think, many years ago. Or not even many years ago, like 4 or 5 years ago. And she said something like, I will never stop fighting for you. Yeah, I haven't heard much on that front, have we? These people want to appear so righteous and that their protesting is going to make a change, but that doesn't mean anything if you don't actually believe in it, or if you believe in it for such a short period of time. And there are so many examples to point to where this is just the way that things go with the news cycle. People get really mad about something for a short time, and then if you look a couple years on, no one gives a shit. Most of these protests vanish as quickly as they appear. The news cycle will burn super brightly for like a couple weeks, and people are super mad about it, but then inevitably that fatigue is going to set in. And this is what politicians know. They know that people are lazy and they're not going to be persistent with their protesting. They know that people are going to get mad for a little bit and they just wait it out. They know people are going to get bored. Anytime a corporation is in some sort of scandal, they release a statement, or they don't do that at all, and they say, don't worry about it, it'll be fine, and the world moves on. It's the same thing with YouTuber cancellations and celebrity cancellations where, you know, you might have some really big scandal go on and it's a big deal, but then quickly no one cares. And that's honestly what the best YouTubers do. They just know that it doesn't even matter. They don't really acknowledge it and they move on. because people get bored. The mob is fleeting. And the latest example of that is probably the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, where people are super, super mad about it, and as they should be. But what do you know? The news coverage is kind of starting to slip. People aren't talking about it as much because they know that they can't keep up this protest forever. And that is a massive protest that people are genuinely very mad about, and it's supposed to be this big political scandal, but yet the elites are like, don't worry about it, bro. I know you're going to forget about it in 6 months, and I'll still be here with my billions of dollars. I don't know, man. I'm not trying to rant too much, but I just want people to get rid of this naive idea that we can just protest and vote our way out of everything, because if you don't keep that persistence up and you don't actually give a shit, then it's not going to do anything. Again, I think it's an identity politics thing. People want to appear like they're doing the right thing and that they're gripping to this ideology. When all those white girls were posting those black squares in 2020, I'm sure they felt like, I'm so good. I'm just protesting. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's just so embarrassing. I'm never going to pretend like I am championing for a certain political cause, because I know that I just don't have the time for it. I don't have the resources for it. There's so many other things that I'm trying to worry about, and I don't want to pretend like I'm something that I'm not. I'm never going to pretend to be some righteous political activist, because I know that that would just be a facade. And it just pisses me off when people try to appear as though they are so morally correct. For most of these people, this was the beginning and end of their activism. The one square that they posted on Instagram was the entire extent of their activism career. I think it really is something that young people get trapped into, because they think that they have like main character syndrome, and that they're going to be the one person standing in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square, and they're going to be the fucking hero of the story. But that is the trap of identity politics and this performance. It gives people the feeling that they are making some huge impact. I want to make sure that during this entire chat that I'm not trying to tell people that it's pointless to protest and that you should never do it. I just don't want people to pretend as though that is making a massive change and that they are Jesus Christ incarnated because they're doing it. If you believe in protesting and voting and getting out there, then power to you. But don't pretend as though that is going to change the world. And certainly don't make anyone feel badly because they are like me, where they don't believe their vote matters. Because shaming people into saying that you're not a good citizen because you don't like voting is not going to do anything for your cause. Because I believe that if you want to make an actual impact, you do it by building a platform. At the moment, I'm not interested in becoming a politics channel and becoming, that kind of thing. But if you want to make an impact, really the best way to do it is to have a voice digitally. If I did want to become a political channel, then I would be so much more impactful to talk about stuff on YouTube than show up to a ballot box. And you see that with so many creators today. Not that I believe in them or agree with their opinions, but you see them like Asmongold and Hassan and just all these streamers that are giving their political takes. Whether you want to agree with it or not, or believe that it's a good thing to do, these people are making an impact with Gen Z. I mean, think about the impact that Joe Rogan had on this past election, where he had Trump on the podcast, or I think Call Her Daddy, that podcast, they had Kamala Harris on. These are huge political moves, and they understand now that podcasting culture is the way to connect with Gen Z. And Joe Rogan of his podcast and Alex Cooper of the Call Her Daddy podcast understand that they individually are going to have so much more of a political impact by building a platform. The concept of being able to vote is still fundamental to the core of American ideals, and I'm not saying that should ever go away, but I just want people to recognize that if you truly are after activism and making an impact in the world, then you should do it by creating a platform. Talk about your ideas on the internet, share them, speak about what's on your mind, just like I'm doing here, but don't act as though voting is going to make an impact, because it's not. And I know that people give the same old tired argument that if everyone thought the way I did, then of course it would never work, but they don't. That's not the world that we live in. People do vote because they believe that it matters, and there's never going to be an election where no one shows up. People are going to keep voting and protesting regardless of what I say. I'm not naive enough to expect that I'm going to change people's minds about that. But what I'm saying is that we just don't live in that world where, if everyone thought the way that I did, it would never work. We don't live in that world, so it's a moot point. I'm just so tired of people signaling their morality like they're such a good person by getting after this certain movement, because it just feels so fake and forced. I don't know what it was like to grow up in the 60s and 70s, obviously, but I know that there was still a huge presence of protesting, like protesting the Vietnam War, or even a little bit earlier, protesting civil rights. And that was a time where that actually mattered, I think, because there was no social media. Nowadays, people want to protest. They want to make sure their makeup looks good and they've got a trendy outfit on so that they'll get snapped by a photographer at a protest and they'll become the next image of the next political movement. It's all so performative and people want to feel like they are going to be the poster child of the next movement. Social media has destroyed activism, in my opinion, because it just makes everything feel like it's about clout chasing and that I'm on the right side of history and I'm a good person. It should really just be about what's the best thing for the country. But again, I want to emphasize that there is a futility to this and that governments know that they can just wait out people's stomping and hollering. They know that it is just a short burst of energy. Most of the time, these are not sustained movements. People's attention spans are so low now that they're just going to move from movement to movement. But at the same time, that is the message that I want to push. Because time does kill momentum. The fastest way to destroy a movement is to get people to stop talking about it. The French Revolution didn't happen because people marched in one weekend and they uploaded a black square to their phone. It happened because they refused to stop, and they were willing to do anything to make sure that they got the corrupt leaders out. They stayed in the streets, they sat in, they starved, they toppled thrones. That is the level of persistence that it takes to actually scare people out of power. You cannot seriously expect to just vote your way to the top. I think the problem right now is that most protests are just not built to last. They are inherently cathartic. They're not strategic. They make participants feel like they've done something, that they have done something morally correct, but then everyone gets to go home. And the news is going to chew it up and spit it out. We'll talk about it for a week, and then we're going to forget about it. And unless you have that structure or endurance, it is going to fade. The system almost always outlasts the outrage. Time and time again, it nearly always wins. And again, the US voting participation rates tell the same story. Like I said earlier, in 2020, about half of people got out and voted, and that was the highest rate in decades. That's the bar. But that's at the national level. When you talk about midterms and local elections, it is pathetic how few people vote. Because I think most people are starting to think the way that I do, where they feel disenfranchised and like, well, shit, my vote doesn't even do anything. Why am I even taking the time out of my day to do this? I don't think people are lazy or anything like that. It's just that they're disillusioned. They've been trained to think that a vote or a black square or a weekend march is the extent of their power. And they think that, well, shit, that's all I can do, you know? That's where my effort is going to end. Nothing else is going to change. But what do we do if we stop believing in voting and we don't believe that protests are going to do anything either? Do we just give up and retreat into apathy and just let the billionaires and lobbyists do everything they want? Or, like I said earlier, do we find other ways to exert influence? I think today, in the digital age, the most important thing that you could do if you care about getting your voice out there is to start a platform. I mentioned this guy recently, Gary's Economics. He's an ex-Citibank trader from London, and he started a YouTube channel talking about economics, and he's a big proponent of taxing the ultra-wealthy so that the working people can survive. And he has started a pretty big movement. He's already got 1.5 million subscribers on YouTube. People listen to what he has to say. Do you really think that he was going to have the same impact showing up to the voting box? Of course not. He is having such a big impact going on interviews with Piers Morgan and talking to the BBC and talking to big news outlets and getting out there. That is the way to make change in today's world. I know some people are going to still argue that not voting or not protesting is not an option. We have to do it. It is a refusal to not participate in the democratic system. But I just think that those ballots and marches are symbolic, man. I think that if you really think critically about the tools that we have been given and the options that we've been given to placate the masses from the elites, it is so that we don't revolt. We're given these things so that we feel like we have just enough hope to keep going. For a country to function, you cannot have the average person not believe they can have any sort of agency, because if they think that, then everything is going to go to hell. You have to give people a reason to get up in the morning and believe that they can make a change, and voting is the perfect way to do that for the average disillusioned person. I really do think that if people want to have any sort of political impact, they have to disconnect from social media, because it has tainted so much of the political process. I am sure that the elites and politicians love social media now, because it gives people a huge avenue to battle and to look as though they are doing the right thing, and it distracts from the reality that there's a ton of corruption going on. oh yeah, just let all these people talk about it on Twitter and Instagram. You know, give them their place to do that. I'm sure they love that. That's the kind of false power that the system loves to give you, to think that you have a voice when you don't. I want to make the distinction between arguing endlessly on Twitter with people that you're never going to change their minds about, and starting a channel like Gary's Economics, or, you know, I hope what I'm doing is helping in some regard, having an individual voice where you're not here to argue, but just to present ideas. That is really the only kind of power I think you have. Or at least the only kind of power I think you have where it is relatively peaceful. Because there are many examples where people say, fuck all this, it's time to revolt. It's like the French Revolution. That was not a particularly pretty, peaceful time at all in France. And when people feel like there really is no other option, that's when things get violent. And that's not the world that I want to see for people, but I get why people end up coming to that conclusion. I want things to stay peaceful, and I want people to be able to share their voice in a way where it actually reaches people. And I believe the only way to do that is to start some sort of personal brand or platform on social media platforms. Again, there's a very big distinction there between arguing endlessly with people for no reason, not making any sort of impact, just arguing with commenters, and actually trying to have a thoughtful conversation. I recently talked about the American Dream, more about the financial part about it. And I do think that the American Dream was built on the idea of choice, that your voice mattered, your labor, your effort mattered. We live in a meritocracy where if you work hard, you will be able to be successful. And maybe voting and protesting really are just extensions of that. But as I said in that recent video, I believe the American Dream is dying. It was built on ideals that worked 50, 60, 70 years ago, but today, in 2025, the financial world we live in is very different, and the political world is also very different. You cannot expect to use the same political tools like voting and protesting that we've used for a very long time and think that it's going to have the same impact. It is a very different world we live in now. These tools that we've been given have just mutated into performance tools, and performances don't change reality. Getting out there with your cute picket sign and wearing your makeup and making sure that you get a selfie at the protest so that people know that you're a good person is not going to change anything. And people need to stop accepting that illusion that this is the way to do it and actually start demanding something better. All I'm trying to get people to understand with this talk is that voting and protesting only gets you so far, and history is full of examples of people who got tired of waiting for their voice to actually matter. Because when that happens, you don't get ballots or hashtags or peaceful talks, you get movements, upheaval, and revolutions. There are many examples where things got very ugly, and I don't want to see that happen today in the modern world. But at a certain point, if people are not listening and you know that your government is out to get you, then I can understand why people form that conclusion. I feel like in a lot of ways right now in the UK, people are getting really fucking sick and tired of an anti-working class government that is basically attacking the average people for just having their flag flying in their country and just being almost treasonous to the average working person, that I can understand why people are getting really angry. And if governments aren't careful and they keep trying to push around people, eventually they're going to have enough and revolt. Again, I don't want violence to ever happen, but I can understand why that would happen. I want to make sure that I really emphasize this takeaway from this talk, and it is that power is not done in single acts. It is sustained pressure. With Gary's Economics, with his YouTube channel, he doesn't just make one video and call it a day. He doesn't just post one black square and say, oh, I guess I just solved racism. A single vote is not going to be enough, and a single video is not going to be enough. But a movement that keeps showing up week after week, they don't allow the elites to silence us, we keep putting on the pressure year after year, that is how history actually changes. And revolutions are rarely one-time events. Like the French Revolution took 10 years for that to fully conclude. People need to put in a ton of continual effort and anger to actually make something happen. You have to refuse to be ignored. So I'm very curious what you guys think about that. I am a true believer that I feel like my vote doesn't matter, that the democratic system is failing us, and I'll make the distinction that it's failing us, but it is not failing the elites. It's working perfectly as designed for the elites, but for us, it is not working. The truth is that voting really is only pointless if that is all we ever do. If we reduce democracy to one ballot box vote, and that's all you ever do, and your activism stops and starts with one gesture, then of course it's going to feel hollow. Real change comes when we stop waiting for a symbolic act to save us. Nobody is coming to save you. You gotta stop looking at voting or protesting as the solution, and rather as the start. Use them as a tool. Day by day, month by month, if you keep up the pressure and you keep sharing your voice, then you can build something bigger, something that lasts.